Under a blazing Montana sun in 1876, Private Charles Windolph dodges arrows in a dust-choked valley, his Springfield jammed. Below, 1,200 teepees swarm with 2,000 warriors, outnumbering Custer's men 5-1. Windolph survives the doomed stand, hauling water under fire. What secrets did he carry from that deadly day? Unveil his truth, now. The Montana sun blazed high on June 25, 1876, scorching the dusty plains as the 7th Cavalry trudged west. Private Charles Windolph, a 24-year-old German immigrant, rode with Company H, his Springfield carbine heavy against his sweat-soaked back. Born in Bergen and der Dum, Windolph had fled to America in 1871, chasing dreams of freedom. Now, 5 years into his service with the 7th, he was a shoemaker-turned-soldier, his hands calloused from cobbling boots for comrades. His heart pounded as the column crossed the divide between the Rosebud and Little Bighorn, 600 men riding 4 abreast, a gap of 50 feet between companies. The air crackled with tension, scouts whispered of a massive Indian village ahead, but no one knew its true scale. Windolph glanced at Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, 36, riding ahead in his buckskin jacket, golden curls glinting under a wide-brimmed hat. Custer's ambition was a fire that both inspired and unnerved. "We'll hit them by dawn," he'd said, planning a surprise attack on June 26. But at noon, hostile scouts spotted the column, and Custer's plan shifted. "We strike now," he ordered, splitting his force. Captain Frederick Benteen took companies H, D, and K to scout the hills, while Major Marcus Reno led M, A, and G with scouts under Lieutenant Charles Varnum. Custer kept companies C, E, F, I, and L, 210 men, for a northern flank. Windolph, with Benteen, felt a knot in his gut. Why divide against an unknown foe? The scouts' warnings haunted him. Crow tracker Half-Yellow Face had pointed to smoke curling 15 miles west, signaling a village of 8,000 souls and 2,000 to 3,000 warriors. Custer scoffed, estimating 1,000 to 1,500 poorly armed fighters. "They'll scatter," he said, recalling his 1868 Washita victory. But Windolph, who'd seen the Black Hills expedition in '74, sensed danger. The terrain, rugged bluffs, deep ravines, and a swollen Little Bighorn River, was a trap. As Benteen's 125 men rode south, their horses stumbled on rocky slopes. Lieutenant Gibson signaled from each hilltop, "No Indians." Windolph muttered to Private Schmidt, "This feels like a ghost chase." After 2 hours, Benteen turned back, relieved to rejoin Custer's trail. Then, gunfire cracked in the distance. Windolph's horse snorted, sensing danger. Ahead, a teepee burned, likely torched by scouts. Sergeant Knipe galloped past, shouting for Captain McDougal to hasten the pack train. Trumpeter Giovanni Martini, a wiry Italian from Company H, rode up, wounded, his horse bleeding. "General says bring the packs quick," he gasped. Windolph, who'd teased Martini's accent, saw steel in his eyes. Benteen nodded, ordering pistols drawn. As they charged toward the bluffs, dust rose like a storm. What awaited in the valley? Why did Custer ignore the scouts? Could unity have saved them? The Little Bighorn Valley unfolded below, a half-mile wide, framed by the river's clear, cold flow and steep Wolf Mountains. Windolph's breath caught as Benteen's troop crested the bluffs at a gallop, pistols gleaming. Below, 150 feet down, chaos reigned. Figures on horseback, soldiers and warriors, galloped wildly, shots ringing out. Farther north, masses of mounted Indians swarmed, their war cries piercing the dust. "Got him Himmel," Windolph whispered, gripping his carbine. The village stretched 3 miles, 1,200 teepees housing 10,000 Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, including 2,000 to 3,000 warriors. Custer's 600 men were outnumbered 5-1. Benteen's men rode toward a knoll where soldiers huddled, Reno's battered force. Windolph pieced together their tale later, but the horror was clear. Around 2 p.m., Reno's 175 men had crossed the Little Bighorn, watering horses before charging the village's south end. They'd formed a skirmish line, 75 yards between each man, advancing half a mile. But hundreds of warriors, led by Chief Gall, swarmed them, wielding bows, lances, and Winchester repeaters. Reno's Springfields, firing one shot every 10 to 15 seconds, were outmatched by repeaters' rapid fire. "Hold!" Reno shouted, but the line buckled as warriors flanked, their cries chilling. Reno ordered a retreat to a cottonwood grove, then, overwhelmed, to the bluffs. The withdrawal was carnage, horses stampeded, men fell, scalped or shot. 15 died crossing the river, 20 more on the banks. Windolph saw survivors now, faces ashen, ammo low. Private Taylor gasped, "They came like demons." Reno, disheveled, rallied his 95 survivors. Benteen's arrival at 2:30 p.m., followed by Captain Weir's Company D, restored order. Windolph helped dig trenches, his hands shaking. Captain McDougall's pack train arrived, bringing 24,000 rounds, a lifeline. North, heavy firing echoed, Custer's fight. Windolph squinted, seeing dust rise 3 miles away. "Where's the general?" Private Malone muttered. Benteen sent word to scout, but warriors blocked the path. Windolph recalled Martini's message, Custer needed ammo. Why hadn't Benteen rushed to him? Later, Benteen claimed Knipe's order sufficed, but Windolph wondered. The hilltop defense hardened as Indians probed, arrows hissing. Windolph fired, his carbine jamming. He pried a cartridge free with his knife, cursing its flaws. Was Reno's retreat cowardice or necessity? Why didn't Benteen aid Custer? Night fell, the hilltop a fortress of fear. Windolph crouched in a shallow trench, the air thick with gunpowder and sweat. Reno's and Benteen's 350 men held a perimeter, their 7th Cavalry reduced to half its strength. Skirmishes flared as warriors tested their lines, shadows darting in the moonlight. Windolph's wound, a bullet grazed to his buttock, throbbed, but he stayed alert. The wounded groaned, their cries haunting. "Water," Private Kelly rasped, his lips cracked. The river, 150 feet below, was a death trap, warriors hid in ravines, ready to strike. At dawn on June 26, Captain Benteen called for volunteers. "We need water for the wounded," he said, his voice grim. Windolph, heart pounding, stepped forward with Private Peter Thompson and 2 others. Their Medal of Honor citations later praised their courage, but Windolph felt only dread. "Cover us," he told Schmidt, who nodded, aiming his carbine. The 4 crept down the bluff, tin cups clanging. Arrows whizzed past, bullets kicking up dirt. Windolph fired, dropping a warrior. At the river, they filled cups, dodging fire. Thompson stumbled, grazed by a bullet, but pressed on. Windolph's hands shook as he hauled water back, warriors closing in. They made 3 runs, each more desperate. On the last, Windolph's cup was shot from his hand, but he grabbed another, sprinting uphill. "You're mad!" Schmidt shouted, pulling him into the trench. The water saved lives, but Kelly died that night. Windolph's wound burned, later earning him a Purple Heart. The Indians' repeaters, 25 to 30% of warriors had them, outgunned the Springfields, whose cartridges jammed under rapid fire. Windolph cursed the Army's gear, knowing Custer's men faced worse. North, silence replaced gunfire. "They're gone," Malone whispered, fear in his eyes. Benteen's scouts reported Custer's fate, 210 men dead, surrounded on a hill now called Last Stand. Windolph imagined Custer's final moments, pistols blazing, brothers Tom and Boston at his side. Why had Custer pressed north? His plan to flank the village, like Washita, underestimated the warriors' unity under Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. The terrain, coulees and ridges, hid thousands. Windolph wondered if Custer's ambition, stoked by Civil War fame, blinded him. What drove Custer's fatal charge? Could better weapons have saved him? By midday on June 26, the Indians withdrew, their victory complete. Windolph stood, numb, as smoke cleared. The hilltop was a graveyard, 40 of Reno's 175 dead, 13 wounded. Benteen's losses were lighter, but the 7th Cavalry was shattered. General Terry's column arrived on June 27, their faces grim. "Custer's gone," Terry said, confirming the worst. Windolph joined a burial party, descending to Custer's battlefield. The sight sickened him, 204 bodies, including Custer, his brothers, nephew Reed, and reporter Kellogg. Most were stripped, mutilated, baked by the sun. Windolph buried them in shallow graves, marking sites with teepee poles. Reno's report, written July 5, detailed the chaos. Windolph read it later, nodding at its truth. Reno's 120 men faced 1,000 warriors, their retreat a desperate bid to survive. Yet whispers of cowardice dogged Reno. Windolph disagreed. Reno saved half his men against impossible odds. Benteen's choice to stay with Reno, not Custer, sparked debate. Windolph recalled Martini's plea, wondering if Benteen's delay doomed Custer. But the pack train's slow pace and the village's size made rescue unlikely. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick later wrote, Custer's plan was doomed by numbers and terrain. Windolph's survival felt like a curse. He saw Bloody Knife, a scout, fall beside Reno, and mourned interpreter Isaiah Dorman, butchered by the river. The Indian strength, 2,000 to 3,000 warriors, not 800 as Terry estimated, came from broken treaties. The 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty promised the Black Hills to the Sioux, but gold in 1874 drew 15,000 prospectors, shattering the pact. Sitting Bull's vision of soldiers falling like grasshoppers fueled their defiance. Windolph, a foreigner, saw irony. He fought for a nation that betrayed its word. Why did the U.S. break its vows? Could peace have spared this blood? Windolph left the Army in 1883 as a sergeant, his Medal of Honor pinned for the Water Run on June 26. He settled in Lead, Dakota Territory, working 49 years at Homestake Mine. At 98, he died in 1950, the last 7th Cavalry survivor. His account, detailed in letters and interviews, became a cornerstone of Little Bighorn lore. Unlike Custer's myth, gilded by Widow Libby as a hero's fall, Windolph's story was raw, fear, loss, and resilience. He wrote of Martini's courage, Reno's struggle, and the Indians' unbreakable spirit. The battle scars lingered. The Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho won a fleeting triumph. By 1877, most were forced onto reservations. Sitting Bull fled to Canada, Crazy Horse was killed. The U.S. Army grew by 2,500 men, crushing resistance. Windolph reflected on the cost, 268 soldiers dead, 50 Indians. The terrain, rugged, unforgiving, amplified the warriors' tactics. Custer's Springfields and Colts were no match for repeaters and mobility. Windolph's survival, like Comanche the horse, was a miracle amid slaughter. Standing on the battlefield years later, Windolph felt the wind whisper of broken promises and defiance. Little Bighorn was no mere defeat, it was a cry for survival. For Windolph, it taught humility and honor. He hoped future generations would listen, building a world where treaties held and courage bridged divides. What does Little Bighorn teach us? How can we honor its lessons today?